What does it look like to create a nonprofit organization to channel your thought leadership? You're going to love my conversation with guest Arlene Blake on this episode of the Speaking Your Brand podcast. More and more women are making an impact by starting businesses, running for office, and speaking up for what matters. With my background as a TV political analyst, entrepreneur, and speaker, I interview and coach purpose-driven women to shape their brands, grow their companies, and become recognized as influencers in their field. This is Speaking Your Brand, your place to learn how to persuasively communicate your message to your audience. Hi there, and welcome to the Speaking Your Brand podcast. I'm your host, Carol Cox. On the podcast this month, we're exploring different ways you can channel using your voice. Last week, we talked about building your personal brand. Next week, we're going to focus on the impact you can have by writing op-eds for newspapers and magazines. In this episode, we're taking a look at creating and leading a community-based nonprofit as a way to amplify your thought leadership. My guest is Arlene Blake, who's the founder of Women on the Rise, a 501c3 organization based in Orlando, Florida. Arlene has built an incredible community, and I've seen her build this over the past few years, so I invited her to come on the podcast to share what she's learned. We talk about why she started her nonprofit organization, Women on the Rise, and it ended up being in a way that she didn't expect. We also dig into the power of vulnerability and sharing personal stories in order to build trust within your community. Arlene shares with us the biggest leadership lessons that she has learned, and this is going to be oh so valuable for you, whether you run a nonprofit or a business or any type of community. And then Arlene shares for you, our listeners here Speaking Your Brand, what she looks for in the speakers she invites for her events, including where she finds them. So you're going to want to make sure to pay attention to that section of the podcast for sure. If you're new to Speaking Your Brand, welcome. We work with women entrepreneurs and professionals to clarify their brand message and story, create their signature talks, and develop their thought leadership platforms. Our mission is to get more diverse, progressive women in positions of influence and power, because we know it's through women's stories, voices, and visibility that we challenge the status quo and change existing systems. You can find out more about us and how we can work with you by going to speakingyourbrand.com. Now, let's get on with the show. Welcome to the podcast, Arlene.
Hi, how are you?
I am fantastic. We are laughing because literally about 10 seconds ago, before I said, I'm going to hit record, I said, let's make sure everything that makes noise is turned off. And then what did you say, Arlene?
Yes, my child is put up in a room with his iPad. That's what I had to turn off. Okay.
Oh, and no, he is great because I was we're going to talk about your organization, but I was at your organization's meeting in July, and he was there on his iPad, just totally doing his own thing while a whole room full of women were all talking about stuff.
So. He was born into this. This is like his thing. He owns Women on the Rise. Yes.
Well, okay, so let's talk about Women on the Rise. Arlene, tell us what Women on the Rise is today, and then we'll back up and talk about how you got here.
Absolutely. So Women on the Rise is a 501c3 nonprofit women's empowerment organization that was formed with the opportunity to provide a platform for women to be able to share their story as to how they've been able to overcome obstacles, whether in their personal life or professional life, but to share that story to empower and inspire other women to be able to do the same. And so that is the premise behind our organization. And we also mentor middle school and high school young ladies in self-esteem and empowerment.
And so you started with Orlando, which is where you live and where I live. And now you also have a chapter in Jacksonville, Florida.
We do. Very excited about that.
And hopefully growing to more cities at some point.
More cities, more countries. Absolutely.
So then Arlene, let's talk about Women on the Rise as an organization. So it's a 501c3, so it's a nonprofit organization. What was the genesis, the seed of the idea where you decided I really need to start a group like this? And why did you decide to do it as a nonprofit versus running it or creating a community through a business?
So Women on the Rise actually came out of my own pain. So in 2015, I made the decision to go to therapy because in 2010, I had lost my mother to pancreatic cancer. In 2014, I lost my father to esophageal cancer. Mind you, my mom was only 48. My dad was only 56. They were relatively young, right? I was in my early 20s. And then my mentor, he passed away too. He had Alzheimer's and it took him. And so with that, I decided to go into therapy. Mind you, I come from a community where, therapy was very taboo. No one in my family had ever talked about it or ever done it. And so me taking that leap and doing it was a huge thing. And so the therapist that I went to, she actually offered me the opportunity to be a part of a women's therapy group. And so I go into this space and I'm seeing these other women who are very well put together professional women sharing their personal story, and they're sharing the pain and the trauma that they had been through. And for me, I was able to feel like I was not alone, and I was able to actually be very vulnerable with those women. And as we began to meet every week and have that level of vulnerability with each other and share with each other, we were also able to pour into one another and build one another up. And so every week I came, I was excited and I was ready to pour into others as well. And the therapist put a calling on me that there was an opportunity for me to bring women together on a consistent basis and do the same thing. And that sat with me for a while, for some weeks. And I decided to hire a career coach. And I decided to jump on an idea that I had actually thought about back in 2009 prior to my mom getting sick. And the idea was to do this women's empowerment event that I had saw. They did something like this in LA. And so I met with her. I show her this notebook full of ideas that I had for this event. I share with her this calling that was placed on me by the therapist. And she said, I think you really got to move on this. And so like any type of, coach, they put a date on you as to when you're supposed to have this done. And so next thing you know, I'm putting down a deposit. I have a date confirmed. I'm working a full-time sales job and I'm trying to figure out how am I going to build this one-day conference. 123 women show up to this event.
That's amazing.
Yes, 123 women show up to this event. It was a great success. And I was like, I did it. It's done. Yay. And then people were like, okay, well, when's the next event? And how do I get involved? Well, I hadn't thought it out that far, right? And so after that, I was like, okay, let me continue to create some events that are similar in nature to some of the workshops that we had during that event. And then I had a mentor who said, Arlene, I'm in the nonprofit space, and I think what you're doing is in alignment with nonprofits. He was like, you really need sponsors and partners, and it's going to be very easy for them to align with you on what you're doing, because every event that you're doing, you're educating people. And that's what a nonprofit really is there to do. It's able to support and educate the community, right? And offer services. And that's exactly what you're doing. And so I looked into it. I hired an attorney that specialized in the development of nonprofits. And before you knew it, we had a 501c3. And, years into this, I've developed strong partnerships with organizations like our Connect Ford with Ford Motor Company partners. And we've been growing together over the years. So it's been amazing being a nonprofit and being able to receive the support that we do with the programming that we're able to do in the community.
Well, Arlene, first I want to say I'm sorry about the losses of your parents. I can't imagine. I lost my dad when I was in college and he was 46 years old. So it's really hard. Thank you for taking your experiences from that and then putting it into something that will help so many other women. You mentioned about vulnerability and about in that women's therapy group, you really got to open up. You felt understood by the other women. You were able to share your stories. And from when I attended that meeting of your organization in July, I noticed that you had every single woman who was there, and you had a good number there. I don't know how many there are, 30, 40 women, answer a question, but it was a personal question. It was about friendships. And is there someone in your life that you wish you would reconnect with whose maybe friendship, has faded away or something? And I know, Arlene, you set the stage as the leader of the group by sharing your own personal vulnerable story first. And that truly is contagious because then the other women feel safe to do so.
The power of vulnerability is something amazing. And I feel like over the years and how we've been able to connect with other women is first starting with each of us, right? With sharing our personal story and allowing for others that comfort and knowing that this is a safe space where we can come together and we can share, right? Because people are looking for that space where they can be their authentic self and share their story and feel like they're supported. And there needed to be that safe space created for all women to be able to come together together. And that's what Women on the Rise serves to do.
And I feel like I know each of those women just a little bit better from hearing their stories than I would otherwise.
Absolutely. Well, that makes me want to cry. There's so many superficial relationships that exist within the world, right? And when you're really able to, get in touch with who a person is and what they're going through, it's really important. I mean, we actually have our membership team will do call-a-thons where they'll call our members and check in to see how they're doing. Because oftentimes you may not hear from someone. You're wondering, I haven't seen so-and-so in a while, right? And you may not know that they just lost their mother, right? Or they have a child who's gone off to college and they're having a hard time, with this separation. And so when we reach out and make those calls, and now we know how we can better show up and support them. And so the power of having that sisterhood where we're able to do that just is amazing. And so it's not just being a traditional nonprofit where we have services, we have this membership level as well too. And it's just our opportunity to really connect and create that sisterhood to where now we can together go and support and empower our community.
Arlene, let me ask you a little bit about just running a community and running a nonprofit, because there's a lot of different people, a lot of different personalities, a lot of different, goals and priorities and things like that. So I'll ask maybe a positive spin on it first, which is, what is the most surprising thing that you have learned about running this community?
So I will tell you, I, as an individual, have grown so much over the years, because I think when I first came into this, I kind of had my way of doing things and my way of thinking. And anyone who did not think or act that same way was just weird, right? And so So I've come to learn there's so many different types of people out here, and there's no one way that is right or wrong. And so I try to extend grace as much as I can to individuals, because I have, if somebody comes back and they have a little bit of sass in how they respond to me, I have to consider in my mind what happened to them today. Right? What's been going on in their life. I had one of our members, it was just every time I reached out and asked something, there was a little bit of an attitude and I couldn't figure out what it was. And there was another one of our leadership team members was I'm done. I can't reach out anymore. And I was something is wrong. I'm telling you, something is wrong. And I reached out to her and I was hey, how are you doing? I'm not calling about anything. I just need to know, how are you doing? Because I'm concerned. I was I've reached out multiple times. Something seems off. And she just let it all out. And we were able to connect. I think we were on the phone almost 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, right? But I've come to realize over the years, you just have to extend grace because you don't know what someone is going through. And then leadership styles are completely different. So I really wish that Deloitte did this for all organizations, but they have this chemistry test that kind of figures out what your leadership style is and your ability to work with other people, what that is. And so we did that as a group one time, where a Deloitte representative came in and they worked with us, and we figured out, okay, that's why you're like that about your emails. And that's why I can never just call you and ask you something, because you need to have a conversation about how my children are doing first. We just figured out how each person really works. And that was extremely helpful in how we then work together, right? Understanding someone's love language, you need to know what their work language is right? And so understanding that and taking the time to understand that about others is something that I've learned over the years, and we've been able to learn about each other. But that is so important when you're working with women. So important. Yes, you have to know them. You have to take the time to get to know them.
Yes, I so appreciate this, Arlene. Yeah, first truly understanding the other people who are in your community on your leadership team, but then also, like you said in the beginning of your answer, is knowing that we like to do things our way because we've done things our way for a long time, and it works really well for us because it's our way of doing things. But you're right, letting people have their way, and sometimes their way, it can even be better than ours.
It can. And so many times now, even when we're having a meeting, I'll have to say, okay, I'm going to give my idea last because I want to see what you all say. I want to be influenced by what my thought is or what my idea is, because then they won't say anything, right? So as a leader, I've had to understand what that looks like and step back. And so like I've said, over the years, I have grown so much. Building a community is completely different than, taking any other random leadership position, especially when it's on a volunteer basis, right? There's a level of patience that you have to have with individuals. It's been amazing. It's been amazing to do. I'm blessed by it.
And Arlene, so let's talk about some of the events that you run. So you mentioned that Women on the Rise really started from a conference that you thought was just going to be a one-off, one-time event. And obviously it has grown to so much more than that. And so I know that you put together in-person meetings and events, and I know that you did virtual during the pandemic. And so let me ask you about the events, because I know for the listeners who are public speakers, they're going to want to know, as an event organizer, Arlene, what do you look for when you decide who you want to invite to speak at your events?
So I think what I look for are subject matter experts, right? So they work in whatever that space is day to day. So being that we're a women's empowerment organization, we'll have who I call feel-good speakers who will reach out, right? And they want to just share a message about empowerment. But I'm looking for something very technical to be able to provide a certain skill set to those who are attending our events. And so I typically try to look for someone who's either working in that particular field of what we're looking to do. If they happen to have a public speaking background, that's an additional plus, right? I know the presentation is going to be even more powerful, but I'm not always looking for people who typically do it on a regular basis. I'm looking for someone who just has that background, whatever that topic is, and that's the person that I want to lead that discussion or to be a part of it.
When you have an event in mind and you know that you need speakers on a certain topic for that, are you then kind of going through your network or asking people for recommendations for speakers? Are people approaching you as speakers who want to speak at your event?
It's a little bit of everything, right? I have my eye open over the course of the year. So sometimes I develop event topics based off people that I've come in contact with, like they specialize in. I'm like, that's really interesting. That's a conversation we need to have. I literally ran into someone who she just sold a business that she created. It was like her second business that she created and sold. I was like, oh my God, we need to have a whole discussion around that. So now I'm thinking about who are people who can speak to that particular topic, right? So I go on LinkedIn, I'm looking there. When I'm networking, I'm looking to see who I can meet, what they specialize in, what's their thing, because that would probably be somebody that I would want to have. I listen to podcasts, and listening to podcasts and hearing guests, I identify people who we might want to have as special guest speakers as well. Sometimes just on Facebook. So social media is a big part of that. And I screenshot different people who I see just to make sure I remember them when we're sitting at the round table and having the discussion. Attending other events, right? Like we have the Orlando Women's Conference that's coming up. It's a great opportunity to see other people that are out there and what they do and to network for that. So it's so many different things. And then my email, I sometimes get different speakers who will send me like their bio sheet and some of the topics that they speak on. And those are other opportunities for us to have people in our pipeline that we might want to have featured at an event. And just because this one event does not line up with that person does not mean that later on we won't be considering them for another event that we have.
Oh, that's really helpful, Arlene. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, let's talk a little bit about the speaking that you do. What types of topics do you most enjoy speaking about? And I assume the audience tends to be mostly women.
Yeah. So you know what? I have found myself also inspiring men as well, too, when I share my story. It just depends on, which audience is before me. I love talking to the kids, right? So about any time that you call me and say, hey, we have some kids that are either in college, can you come and share your story with them? I'm all about it. I know I did an event a couple of years ago, right before the pandemic closed everything up. And I was speaking in front of the kids. I didn't realize until I got there that I had 30 minutes. I was like, I thought it was 15 minutes. What happened? So they're like, no, we need you to do 30 minutes. So I get up there, I do this 30-minute speech in front of these kids, and I didn't think they cared about anything that I said. It was so quiet. And I like to make contact. Like I put people on the spot during my presentations. And so I was like in some of their faces, and they were like that, giving me that blank look. And so afterwards, they were allowed to choose any of the speakers that they wanted to hear more from and go to their section of the room and ask them questions. And so I was ready to pack it up and leave. Do you not know, probably about 55% of those kids came over to see me. And I was like, you guys like me? You like me? believe it. So sometimes you resonate with people and you don't even realize you're resonating with them, right? And so that was awesome. They're like, yeah, I want to come volunteer with you. How do I get involved? So that was great. So I love working with the kids. When I'm talking to women, I'm sharing my personal story as to how I started with Women on the Rise, how I was able to turn, the pain that I suffered with losing my parents. I can hold it together most times, but, at night it hits me sometimes, or random parts of the day, and it's still a lot. But I feel so blessed to know that I was able to take that and pour into others who cannot seem to find the light outside of what they're dealing with right at that moment. And so I loved sharing that. I also like talking to people about stopping the whole procrastination thing and really jumping into the ideas that they have, because I had to launch myself into creating Women on the Rise. I have to launch myself into starting membership, into going and getting sponsors and creating these community partnerships, right? Like, I can't just talk about it. I actually have to execute and do it. So I love talking about that as well. And then I love talking about the development of relationships. We talked about friendships recently. And what I realized over the years is that there are a lot of people who are suffering from the loss of a friendship or a relationship because they can't figure out how to move that forward. And I have 2 friendships that at some point in time had ended in my life, and we've come back together. And there had to be a level of maturity that we each had in order to do that. And it has blessed my life beyond anything that I can even describe to you. And I want to see more people get outside of themselves and take that leap. And so I feel like sharing that story, I think will help a lot of people as well. So those are all different things that I love to get up and share and talk about.
Well, I'm going to give a call to action to the listeners right now based on this idea of friendships and relationships, because it was really powerful when we talked about it at the meeting. Is if there is someone in your life, a friendship that has faded, whether it was from long ago or relatively recently, to Arlene's point, like, make the first step and see if there's an opportunity to have a conversation and to reconnect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because more than likely that person is feeling the same way. Just someone has to be bold and brave enough to step into that and to make that first move.
All right, Arlene. So let me ask you a couple of your favorite recommendations for our listeners. I always get so much out of these when guests share them. So the first one is, what is a favorite book?
Yes. So I had to think long and hard. I was like, what is my favorite book by a female author? And I'll tell you, it's Shark Tales by Barbara Corcoran. I remember when I first read that book and I was like, she is the GOAT. Okay. Listen, I told you I put him away and here he is.
Yes. Well, he's quiet. Okay. We can see him on the video. So listeners, you can go watch the video on the show notes page.
That's my mini-me. He always has to make an appearance ever since I can remember. That's enough. So Shark Tales by Barbara Corcoran is like my ultimate favorite book by a female author. I think that book allowed for me to realize who I was and to be able to really step into that. I think oftentimes we worry about what other people think of us. It's almost like a fake it till you make it, which I hate that term, but I loved how Barbara shared how when she really wanted to step into real estate and really show up, she basically had to say she bought this fur coat, put it on, and she owned it. And I have to do the same thing because sometimes I don't know what the hell I'm doing, right? But I'm like, I just got to own this and step into it, right? And every time I do it, it's still very successful. So I took a lot of lessons from her. And there was a failed relationship that she grew out of in order to build what she was able to do. And at the same time, when I was building Women on the Rise, I was going through a toxic relationship that I had to get myself out of. And even with that, I was able to inspire a lot of other women to be able to do the same. And so I love her story, and that was definitely one of my favorites.
Oh, okay. I have not read that, so I will check that out. All right, Arlene, what is a favorite TED Talk?
So we've talked about vulnerability today, right? And so Brene Brown's The Power of Vulnerability was a game changer in my life. I first experienced some of her books back when I was going through therapy, originally when I started Women on the Rise, and that TED Talk was everything to me.
Yes, it is amazing. Yes, it's so powerful. And a favorite quote that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so every day you hear something that's amazing. And so I have to read this word for word in what I wrote. And so today I had the opportunity to be in front of Susan Worthington. She is the interim director at Winnie Palmer Hospital here in Orlando, Florida. And she said, loving what you do and allowing yourself to be excited about the work you do and be curious opens up opportunities. Things that you did not think were possible suddenly become reality. And that was so powerful to me because oftentimes we don't think that we're maybe not necessarily capable to do something. Maybe our resume doesn't speak that we're able to do it. But when we really show up and we're passionate about what we do, the doors will open and we'll find our place. And so I really love that.
Oh, Arlene, thank you so much for sharing that. And for those of you listening, you can find Arlene on LinkedIn. We'll make sure to include a link to her LinkedIn profile there, as well as on her website, which is womenontheriseorlando.com, which is the Orlando chapter. So make sure to, especially if you live in the Orlando, Central Florida, or Jacksonville area, you definitely have to come to one of Women on the Rise's meetings or events. And so Arlene, tell us, okay, so we're in September 2022 right now. What is on the horizon for Women on the Rise?
So if you also follow our website, wotrinc.org, which is our main nonprofit website, you'll be able to see some of the main events we'll be doing. So we have Educated and Broke coming up. That is like a huge part of what we do. So our 4 core principles for our organization, we have career development, entrepreneurship, financial literacy, and health and wellness. And so coming up, we're going to be focusing on that career development and that entrepreneurship piece with Educated and Broke. It's all about not being educated and being broke, right? It's all about getting rid of that. And so we're here to help women to be able to identify the resources, to be able to help them thrive in their careers and in their businesses. So we'll have that coming up. We also will have our fall themed picnic in the park taking place in Jacksonville. And then we'll have some community activities taking place to support women and girls in both Jacksonville and Orlando towards the end of the year. And then we're rallying up to get ready for the first big quarter of 2023, because that's when we have like everything back to back. So vision board events, conference, Women on the Rise, awards gala, all of that stuff comes at full speed come the top of the year.
Oh, fantastic. Well, I can't wait. Arlene, thank you so much for coming on the podcast, sharing your stories and your leadership lessons. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. So good to be with you, Carol.
Thanks again to Arlene for coming on the podcast. Be sure to connect with her on her website. That's wotrinc.org, as well as on LinkedIn. Both of those links are in the show notes. You can also take our speaker archetype quiz if you haven't already. This is a fun, free quiz. Just takes a few minutes. There's 10 multiple choice questions, and you'll discover which of our 4 speaker archetypes you are. And this will help you to leverage your natural communication strengths as well as add to them. You can take this free quiz by going to speakingyourbrand.com/quiz. Again, that's speakingyourbrand.com/quiz. Next week, we're going to be talking about the impact you can have by writing op-eds with my guest, Princella Talley. You're not going to want to miss that, so make sure to hit follow or subscribe in your podcast app. Until next time, thanks for listening.